So I'm George Landon. I'm from EKU, Eastern Kentucky University, 2 hours west of here. Okay, and so I direct our gaming institute there. Just as a little bit of background, so my degrees, so I have a PhD in computer science. Always been a fan of games, though. I threw this up there. This is the first computer I ever worked on when I was little. Right, this is a K-Pro, first portable computer. Anyway, made games on there, right? Text-based games. And always loved arcade games, too. I won't go into that right now. Then I got into doing some kind of interesting stuff, a lot of 3D scanning. Got to go to Puerto Rico a couple times to scan rock art. And that kind of led me back. So, I got my PhD, and then I got into teaching and made my way to EKU. And this is just one more example. So a lot of the stuff I always did was driven by technical things, right? Really trying to push the boundaries of what you can do technically, right? Performance-wise, doing really cool graphical things. And that always leads to pushing limits and probably also not getting what you want, right? You're trying too hard. And that's kind of the case with research a lot of times too. Right? The whole point of research is to try something that's never been tried before, and more than 90% of the time it doesn't work, and it's not a failure, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit too, because all right, really quick, I got to pitch EKU. Just so we have BS in computer science with a concentration in interactive multimedia. Was just last year ranked 47th in the world. We have a minor in game content design as well, so we do a fair amount of art stuff. We have working on a new master's in fine art for game design as well. All right, so what I want to go, the whole point of this talk, so I've been teaching game design for over 10 years. And one of the things I see are students who really, really want to make games and really put a ton of effort in. And then they kind of fail. They don't fail the classes. And I want to talk about that because that's a huge distinction between failing a class and failing and making a commercially successful game or even a successful game. Commercially successful is a very gray area. Anyway, observations I've seen from students, and this is one. So I think of students, students that come to EKU and other ones I've talked to, they usually have some really good game ideas. And most of those game ideas come from playing really good games, right? Years of playing really good games. Maybe playing bad games too, right? That always helps. And if I talk to most students, they usually have at least 3 game ideas. I kind of group these. So there's this freebie idea that you throw out in a very casual gathering. It's the one that you always, if a game ideas come up, here's the one I throw out because it's kind of my, I don't care if anybody steals it kind of idea. Then there's a second idea that's more of your idea with a friend, the one that you've talked about a bunch. And it's the one you really want to make if the friend sticks around, you want to make it as a team. And then you have your third idea, which is your secret idea, the one that you never share with anyone. And the one that's going to make you the billions of dollars, right? Most of those ideas, and then there's some students who have 20 ideas, and that's cool too. What I see, though, is most of those ideas come from playing AAA titles, right? Or really good indie titles as well. And what happens is all your ideas are kind of grounded in games that can be made by a group of 300 people over 2 years or even a year, 500 people over 6 months. Things that you could never, ever try. You could attempt. You would fail so quick that, it's just not even worth trying. But it's kind of this idea, and if I talk to students, it's not like they don't know. They know that. They know that this game is huge. And they have a clear understanding that indie titles take less resources, right? That's fair. Usually, a really good indie title, maybe there's 15 people working on it, right? There's still 15 people if you're one person. It's a pretty good jump there, right? The other one, and this one's huge, it just takes time and practice, is limited project management experience. time estimation. You know, how long is it going to take to animate 15 characters? How long is it going to take to write in, include in my engine some type of pathfinding or AI? That's stuff that it's not easy. Like, it's not easy for professionals to do that. It's not easy for you to do it, right, as a student. It's hard. It takes practice. It takes a lot of trial and error and failure. So let me jump to that, and let me jump to kind of the other issues. So I see this as two kind of colliding issues that lead to students getting kind of frustrated, right? So in academia, we have to do things. We have to do high school, college, whatever it is. You have to get grades at some point. We have to say you're doing a good job, you're doing a bad job. And I just threw this up here because this is some of the stuff we look at behind the scenes for grading. These really, really blanket statements. You know, you'll get an A for this specific project. This is very broad. But implement an algorithm for interactive real-world simulation. What does that mean? You get an A if you're able to implement it with some additional enhancements. Right? That's good. I mean, that's fine. So that's what we use, and that's the kind of metrics, that's the things we use to help grade assignments. So that doesn't help you make a really good game, right? It may make a game that functions, right? It functionally works. If you write code, it actually compiles and you can run it. The other thing I see is that assignments give students boundaries. It actually kind of closes you in and says, if I do just this, I'm good. You know, I do this, I get the A, I get the B. I don't want to do anything beyond that because why? Why should I go past my assignment? So the other issue is, if we need to assign grades, we need to have a definite stopping point of when the grade's assigned. That's terrible for games, right? In a semester, so we use semesters. I'm not sure what you use here, quarters or terms. Just call them terms, right? There's really no likelihood that you can make a game and get it out to market and have 1 million downloads in a single term, right? That's just not reasonable. So what you end up doing is you wait, right? And then maybe after the semester's finished, then you could have time to finish and take a game to market. The issue is that's totally beyond getting the grade. And what I typically see is students have crunched so hard up to that point, they're done with the project. They don't want to ever see it again, right? And it happens. I mean, that's the thing. You've looked at this code, you look at this specific thing so much, you got what you were supposed to get out of it. You're supposed to get your grade out of it. And, you know, you basically stop because why not? You know, you got other things you want to do. You have a life. You don't want to, right? If you're getting paid to work on a game, right? And since in school, you're basically getting paid with a grade, right? You get the credit hours for it. So you've received what you expected to get out of that project. So these are issues, right? These are some of the issues that I see coming from students making games, and it leads to kind of unrealized potential a lot of times. I guess I can click this. Okay, so questions we should ask, you know, so this is just general stuff I want to throw out. If a game does become commercially successful, maybe it generates revenue, should that automatically make it an A game, right? When numerous features of a game have to be cut, should the grade suffer? These are hypotheticals, but they happen all the time, right? Well, maybe not this one, but this one happens all the time. What should happen when a game project meets all the technical requirements but is not fun to play? Do you give them a bad grade? Do I give my students an F because the game's terrible to play but they meet all the requirements? I don't, right? I don't typically do that. That's not really fair. But what about a game that doesn't meet the requirements but's really fun to play? Right? How do you weight that? You know, so these are issues. This is some of the reasons it's hard to make a game commercially successful out of a classroom. Right? So kind of get the bad stuff out of the way there first. This stuff's getting better. I think in general, instructors at most colleges are considering this stuff more. High schools too, and you know, it's one of those things where this takes kind of a long it's a long change, right? There's a really long tail with this where most educators don't see commercially successful as something you should really add a grade to, because what happens if a game's really good but bombs, right? Should you give a student an F for that? I don't think that's necessarily fair, because that's not the whole point of education, right? You're allowed, if you learn a lot from your mistake, I shouldn't penalize you, right? In the industry, you get penalized. The industry, you go out of business, or you forfeit a loan. You know, bad things occur. In education, mistakes are actually really good if you learn from them. Okay. All right. So what I want you to do is kind of think it differently. So those 3 game ideas you may have, these 20 game ideas you may have, don't throw those out. I was telling somebody last week, you know, Stephen King has this phrase I think he uses, it's a kill your darlings, right? It's where you take your really ideas that you hold really close to you and just kill them, right? Because they may be hindering you from coming up with new ideas. And it's not bad to do that frequently. Just kill all of your ideas, because if you have this secret idea that's going to make $1 billion, there's a good chance it's really limiting new ideas. So start thinking about things you can actually implement. All right. So there's this term the industry uses a fair amount. It's called a vertical slice. And actually, I didn't realize how political this was. There's a lot of talk on it online. The best example I like to think of for this are unfinished portraits. This is just a Google image search of an unfinished portrait. And this is what I want you to think of when you're thinking of games to implement in a classroom, right, or for a class, or a project with other students. You should not expect to complete release a fully polished game. Examples of portraits, you know, artists typically they don't just magically have the portrait done, right? If you look at there's a few larger ones too. Examples where you start with the face and then you have the rest of the background drawn, right? Just you know, I'm not going to say that any of these are bad. You know, they're not finished, and that's okay. But it gives you a really good idea of what the final product should look like, right? So the idea of a vertical slice, and I think personally, in my opinion, I think every student game should be a vertical slice. Even if you have a year to implement it, you should still implement a vertical slice. So just think, you know, taking a layered cake and slicing through it, you pull the cake out, you can see the different layers. That's exactly what this means. So most games, not every game, genres kind of change that. Most games you can implement like a 2-minute, 3-minute playable version of your game that really gets the point across of what your game is supposed to be. If a student tries to implement 30 hours of gameplay in a semester, a term, a year, they're going to fail, right? That's just too much. Unless you're doing an endless runner, I guess you could just say that at that point it's a 30-hour gameplay. But you know, it's not. Okay, so anyway, so think about this. Keep this in the back of your head at all times. And don't ever try to implement a complete game, as in a game you would buy off the shelf, right? Or go buy a full Steam game. Take a step back from the idea of a demo too, right? Playable demos. That can go along with this. Just be aware people use the terminology a little differently. This doesn't even have to be as polished as a playable demo. All right. So, for instance, some things that don't work with this are like a racing game. A racing game, if you don't have the physics working in a racing game, if you don't have one course in a racing game, like nobody's going to play it, right? You got to have a full course, and at that point, if your game's totally playable, if your racing game is totally playable, and all you have to do is add additional courses, it's gone beyond a vertical slice. Racing games are really hard to slice because the physics is the hardest part, right? And you could I'm going to add features like multiplayer after I implement single player. I'm going to add AI with additional cars. but that's not quite a vertical slice. It's going a little bit past it. All right. So let me give you some examples of really good vertical slices. And be warned, these usually come from game jams. So game jams, you've not heard of one. They're a 48-hour period usually where you make games, which forces you. There's no way anybody thinks that in 48 hours you can make a full like retail ready game, right? So you don't do it, so you don't even try, right? So you know that before starting with a game jam, you're going to create a very simple, right, demonstration. Anybody play Gods Will Be Watching?
I saw it on Game Jolt, I think.
Yeah. So they started, so this was Ludum Dare. That's the biggest game jam. They do 3 of those a year. And they implemented, it's a point and click adventure game. They implemented a single scene. So like, this is all you did, right? This was the only thing you saw. You saw different characters. You could interact with the characters, and there was dialogue, which with a point and click adventure, that's pretty important, right? But there was no ability to walk off screen. So everything was set around a campfire. And now this did really well, and they actually were able to go, and they got funding, and they did a full retail version of this, and you can walk off the screen now, right? There's multiple scenes you can walk through. This one you were trying to, you're on a foreign planet, and you're trying to help all the members of your crew survive for 40 days. But it's all just around a single campfire, right? So really good example of a vertical slice, right? I'm not saying this is easy, right? It still takes time with dialogue, writing, right? The dialogue, writing the narrative for this would take a lot of time. And then basic interaction like mouse click and things like that, picking objects, talking to other characters. That takes time. This was, I think, 8 to 10 people working on this over, I think this one was actually 72 hours if you have a team. But, you know, it works, right? And if you can slice your game down into the small playable version like this, I think this ended up being, I don't remember, it was like 30 minutes or so to play it. Or maybe less, depending on how fast you went. But it works. It showed people exactly what the game was supposed to be. There was no doubt if they played a full version of this that they couldn't, you couldn't figure out what it was going to be like, what the gameplay was going to be like, what you could expect from another 4 hours of gameplay, right? Another example, this is just the tip, was the original Game Jam game. Anybody know what this is?
Yeah.
Star Wall, right? So Star Wall, right, 4-player, same screen. Well, it's not always 4-player, but it can go up to 4-player, same screen, multiplayer game. It was called just the tip in their original Game Jam game. These were students that made this from Canada. But I think it was like 4 students, maybe 5. And, very straightforward mechanic, right? Narwhal horn pierces the heart of the opponent, and you each get 5 hearts, I think, in this version, or 4 hearts, 5 hearts, and you play it to the death, right? So you get so many lives, and the winner takes all in this example. Really, one level at this case. It's not even narwhals in space yet. It's kind of getting there, but they've added a ton to it. But playing this version, you knew exactly what a full version of the game would play like. Okay. Bring up another one. Does anybody know this game? Yeah.
This is the game that was based off of Portal.
Yes. So this is the spiritual predecessor of Portal. Yeah. These were students, think of DigiPen. This is the game that you had 2 portals, and you walked around, and there was, I think, 5 puzzles, 6 puzzles, and you had to avoid lava, right, by placing a portal, and you had to make boulders, pass through a portal to hit enemies, nice puzzles. And it was only, I think, like 5 minutes to play through it. It's a really quick game. It won. They submitted that to Indie Games Festival. It won. I think it won that year. Gabe Newell saw it and liked it and said, come work for me, make the full game. And they did, right? So we had Portal 2, and yeah. So again, small examples of gameplay. Another one, Octodad, right? This one was actually, so this is DePaul University, and they originally set out to make this game win. They wanted to submit this to Indie Games Festival and win. So they developed a team over the summer, and the original game, has anybody played the original Octodad game?
I have.
You played it? Okay. So it's neat because the cutscenes are all just drawn like storyboards, right? They're nice, they look good, but it's just frames, right? So they don't worry about rendered cutscenes, which take tons of time. That would be huge amounts of effort, but they could still get the basic story across with single, framed, multiple frames for cutscenes. The basic controls there, the whole point of having a really hard interface to make the octopus walk around so that he appears more like a human, right? That's the idea. It did well, and again, it's a short playable demo. It's free online. You can find it really easily. Let me grab one more. Superhot. So again, game jam game. This was 7 days FPS jam. Superhot, they stuck to a very reasonable mechanic. They have this. They kept their idea throughout, right? This idea that time stops unless you move, or vice versa, however you want to say it. Time moves only when you move. So they turned it into an FPS, became a little bit more of a puzzle game. They don't like to call it a puzzle game, but they have a VR version of it too. Yeah, right. But this idea that you can stop. You don't have to worry about the enemy attacking. You can take breaks during gameplay and plan out movements, right? But really solid mechanics, simple mechanic, but implemented extremely well, right? That's the thing. It's nothing. I don't think anybody's going to argue that Superhot is not a commercially successful game. It's doing really, really well, and the VR version of it is doing well too. Is it out yet for VR?
Yeah.
I haven't played it. Okay. Okay, so those are examples. Again, these are all games that came from Game Jam games, so really small playable versions of a game that have gone on to be really commercially successful. Okay, so be warned. I mean, just because you make a Game Jam game doesn't mean it's going to be awesome and it's going to be commercially successful. Ludum Dare, they get, I'm trying to think, 3,000 submissions every jam. So yeah, some Minecraft. There's a lot. Yeah, it really forces you to think about the important parts of your game and what should be thrown out, right? So it's really good to constrain your development with time. It's easy when you think you have 3 months to work on a game or 4 months that, I can add all this stuff because I have 3 months to work on a game. And then you end up not, it's just 3 months go by, a month goes by, 2 months goes by, you got stuck on this really hard problem. So in general, these are exceptions. Not everyone who submits a Game Jam game does well. What I want to do is go through some example games. So these are games my students have created. And some of these are really good. A lot of these, the students usually ended up getting a job afterward and they just wanted to stop working on it. It's like, well, now I'm getting paid. I don't feel like working on this game anymore. I'll talk about that in just a second. So just a few. I don't have videos of these. I just picked out screenshots. But here was one. It was really fun. This was a twin stick shooter. The idea was that you're asleep and these are your nightmares, and you had to stay asleep to kill all of your nightmares. All right. So if you died, you actually woke up. You saw an alarm clock. Like as your health started going down, the alarm clock sound would start getting louder. So it was kind of fun. And then you also, as you were navigating through the world, you picked up a party, and the party would act as your protection, right? And you could change formations and stuff. It was really cool ideas. Then they ended up, like the last week, right before they were going to demo it, like at the end of the semester, they added these lava pits. No, lava. They were like slime pits that made no sense. Like one of the team members started throwing all these extra assets in. I don't know why. Like it was like one of those things where I think somebody just got really excited to add some additional things. They thought there was some empty spots, and they had a little bit of issue with maybe enemies getting caught on corners due to collision detection, stuff like that. But it was very playable. I think at that point the team started kind of like, why'd you add all that stuff? And there was a little bit extra friction on the team, and they were kind of like, let's just stop working on it at that point. It was kind of sad because it was a fun game. I like playing this a lot, but they, again, they finished, they graduated, and they were just kind of done with it. So this is this cautionary tale of the other part of it is if you finish your game right at the end of your term, right at the end of the term, you're probably, one, it's not polished, right, because you just finished the playable mechanics and the core game loop. The other problems are probably that it's maybe it's not clear from all the players what the playable version's supposed to be like. I'm sorry, players, developers, right? Everybody on the team, what the playable version is, and somebody may have had this additional thought that, well, they really were supposed to have these slime pits in there. I don't know where that came from, but it added a little bit of division on the team, and that at that point, then they lost connection with one another, and the game just died at that point. So I'll bring up a few more. Here we go. This is LVD. This was kind of a Slender Man inspired game. So you were in an abandoned, I think it's underwater. Maybe an underwater mining facility. Does that sound right? A sewer? What? And there was this machine that had gone crazy, and they called it the Ghost. It had these 3 lights, and you had to go around and keep lights turned on. If you were in a room without lights on, this thing would come find you. If you were ever in the room with it, it would kill you. So you would die. Very, very Slender Man style game. Worked well. It actually worked really well. The playable version wasn't that fun. It's a really good idea. It's just, why would you walk around these places? Like, there was no reason to leave your main safe area, right? And it made sense in the design document. Like, it sounded like a fun game. Then you start playing it, and it's like, I need a reason to leave because no one wants to leave, and then no one plays the game, right? And that's one of those things, you got to actually play it. They got the final playable version done like a day before they had to demo it, and at that point, it's kind of late to add anything else. I got 0 time left. I'll go through these quick. First-person shooters. This was done in Unreal. It was really cool. It looked really good. It did not play well at all. FPS games are, they got to be polished. They've got to control has to be really tight. People expect really, really good polish on these games. If it's not, they just want to throw the controller, and it's bad, right? The problem is they had 4-player split screen, a lot of really cool features. It just wasn't that fun to play. Again, it's time. Here's another one. This was a Territorial Acquisition game. This is one I actually had teams that kind of broke apart on this one. Really cool concept. You had this power grid that moved around. It's a 2-player game. Every turn, the next player gets to make the move. And if you're the player that completes surrounds an object, you acquire that thing, right? So if you made the final move, right, to complete a circle there, you would acquire this asset. Yeah, it's like the box game, yeah. And then this other team member was doing all the 3D assets to make it in a really cool 3D world. Person who was developing the puzzle aspect never got it to work in 3D, so all of his assets were never used in the game, which was sad. So, that's, again, scope, right? It's doing too much with too little time. I'm going to jump. I might jump back to this one just a second. This one, I actually got a really good playable demo. I don't think I have time probably to show it. I may show it as you're leaving. Really good. So this was kind of it's a narrative-driven game. You fall in a cave and you have to escape. There was a 2D puzzle game. Here's one I want to show. This was a haunted house tycoon game. So you're supposed to design a haunted house and make money based on scares. They really ran into pathfinding issues with this. And they got to work. They got to work really well, but they only had about 2 weeks left in the term to finish at that point. And this is one of those, they should have changed their idea. So we had given them thoughts of, why don't you maybe make like a really weird queue simulator, like make it like an airport simulator where you have to make people stand in line, or something different, because the haunted house thing, to finish it, you're not going to have enough time. So change your idea. It's okay to cut, drop, just drop the whole idea, and don't start over, but just take what you have and make it a cool, interesting game or experience. They weren't interested in doing that. They wanted to do the haunted house thing, and it's like they were too stuck on the original idea to think about, so they ended up getting some stuff to work. It just wasn't that fun. Okay. Yeah, there's more. I won't go over. I know I'm already late on time here, but all right. So my recommendations. So those are examples, and those are things. I hope it helps to see some examples. Like there was an RTS game. I'll jump back there for a second. A real-time strategy game. I would not recommend doing a real-time strategy game in any class ever. It's too much work. RPGs, it kind of depends. If you can think of doing a vertical slice on it where it's only like 2 minutes of gameplay, that could be reasonable. If you're trying to do 200 hours of gameplay, don't do it in a class. It's not going to work. It's going to be hard to get 2 minutes of gameplay to be really good, where somebody wants to play more of it. Trying to think of some other ones that were bad. Open worlds are really hard to do well, right? It's fun to do exploration, and you can come up with kind of just an experience. Maybe it's not a game. Just be aware that open worlds lead to a lot of open problems, and it's rough. Platformers, make sure you spend time, like get the basic platformer done halfway through your required time, and then polish the whole rest of the time, because controls, people get so mad about platformers without good, polished, clean controls. Your jumping's not right. Your hit boxes are wrong. That stuff. It's going to kill your game faster than anything else. Jump. There's any other ones here? Yeah, we had some other ones. I mean, again, we had one was like a CSI style game, a detective game. Dialogue was a huge issue in there, with interacting with the dialogue as well, right? Trying to show it all, make the user interface really clean. User interface is extremely important, and you have to consider it early, especially on some games. Okay, so what should you do, right? So check your motives. Think about if you're trying to implement a better version of your favorite AAA game. If you're doing that, stop. Just don't. You can't do it. I mean, don't do that. It's not that you couldn't later in life, but as a student, just don't do that at all. Limit your mechanics. The examples I showed, the successful games, they're all based around like simple mechanics, right? Portal's a really simple mechanic. Superhot's a simple mechanic. Minimize your core game loop, right? Make sure it's clear what's going on, like what's your player supposed to do every few minutes, every few seconds, what decisions are they supposed to make. Make sure that's really clear. That's like the Slender Man game. It wasn't clear what they were supposed to do. Like, were they supposed to leave the room? Why would they leave if they get attacked? Why don't you stay in the safe spot? Take criticism. This one's really, really difficult. Because especially if you spent 3 months of your life, 2 years of your life, if it's your secret idea, you've been working on it for 10 years, you don't want to tell anybody, because you probably don't want to have criticism on your idea, right? If you showed your demo game to Justin McElroy, he might tear it apart. But he wouldn't do that because he doesn't like you. He would do that because he wants your game to get better, right? So that's a hard thing in games. But be aware, most of the people criticizing, there's a few exceptions. Most of them, though, are doing it because they want, they like games and they want your game to be better. Compare. Look at Ludum Dare. It's spelled like Ludum Dare. But look at it. Look at the games that are submitted and get an idea, right? A lot of them look terrible, and they're really, really small games. And that's okay. Based off that, go from the ground up. Don't go from AAA down, right? Watch people play your game. That's important, really important. Stand back. We were at an exhibition last weekend in Lexington, and there's a guy there who's been making games for a long time, and I was watching him, and he was standing like 10 feet back from his booth, watching people play games, his game, and he's like, you got to make sure you're not too close, because then they get scared, they're not doing it right. You got to stand so far back that they're not aware you're there, but you got to be close enough to make sure you see what's going on. Cut things, change things a lot. It's okay to change them. I won't go into it. There's really good stories on games that are not, the original game idea is not what got released and ended up making millions of dollars, right? That happens. I got that in there twice. I guess that's good. Take criticism. Okay. All right. And then we drop to questions. One more plug. So we have Vector, which is a conference kind of like this in Richmond. Richmond, Kentucky. It's about a 2-hour drive or so. It's going to be this April. We had speakers from Ubisoft and Bungie and Devolver Digital last year. So cool stuff, right? So come on over next year. Any questions? I might have gone quick. I'm sorry. I had it's a lot of games, and I skipped a few. It's kind of, in some respects, a little discouraging to see all these games that could have been something, but I don't want that to be discouraging to you. Just think, keep in mind, when you finish the semester, you may get an A. You finish your term, you submit everything, you can get an A, but is that what you want, right? Do you want the A? Probably, but do you also want to continue making the game? Let me bring up this one really quick. So this was made in Unreal, and they did a great job with it. The lead student on it, I think he worked 60 hours the last 2 weeks of the semester, and he slept in the lab floor to finish this. I'm sorry, I don't have my screen duplicated. Give me a second, it'll come up. And by the time he was done, he was done. He was physically done. He didn't want to think about the game again for a month. And even after a month, he was just kind of like, I don't ever want to see this stuff again. If you do that to yourself, you're probably not going to ever want to work on your game again. Oh no. Video driver crashed. Unreal. Is it because, let me duplicate my screen, that'll help. So we change our curriculum a fair amount to try and help these situations from occurring, because they do. Let's see if it crashes again. Play. Was it going to play? There's even sound. He talks in it. Oh, the resolution may not be enough. That's okay. We'll play with lower res. So you play. There is music. There's dialogue. He talks. You're walking around, you fall into this cave, and you get stuck. And then, did it crash again? Oh, nice. That's my laptop. That's not their game. I'm sorry. That would be fun. It would be fun. There's some really cool games. Is it Code.Heartbreak? Or I don't know. There's a game. There's a couple that you program inside of the game. Maybe I'll get this to run. Anyway. Be aware, you're going to be burned out by the time the term's over. So don't do that to yourself. Cut your scope down. If you think you're going to have 15 minutes of dialogue, cut it to 30 seconds of dialogue and then add a little bit back if you have time. Right? Go really small and then add. It's better to add back once you have a working, fun game. It's a lot better to add things than to try and take away the last minute. Because you don't take away the last minute, you end up just not finishing, and or you killed yourself, and it's not fun anymore, right? So, questions? Any questions? Unreal's good. It's just it's taxing. Make sure you have a decent computer before you try and run it. Sad. Anyway, all right. Okay, I'll go. I'll be around here too if anybody has questions or anything.
I'll get to run.